Long ago, on the sun-soaked shores of southern Italy, there stood a bustling Roman city called Pompeii. Today, the ruins lie silent, watched over by Mount Vesuvius. But once the streets rang with footsteps, voices, and the commerce of daily life. To walk those streets, in the days before the eruption, was to step into a place both ordinary and extraordinary, a city alive with shops, taverns, temples, and, hidden in plain sight, houses of forbidden pleasure. In this story, we will wander slowly, not in haste, through the brothels of Pompeii. Those curious establishments that once welcomed sailors, merchants, citizens, and strangers. We will not hurry because there is no need. Instead, let us imagine the city in all its details, from the stone streets that still bear the grooves of cart wheels to the fading frescoes on plastered walls. As if time had paused for us to look more closely. The city of Pompeii was not vast like Rome, nor a capital of empire, yet it held within it all the features of Roman life. There were grand villas for the wealthy, markets full of chatter and clamor, amphitheaters where crowds gathered for blood sport, and fountains where the thirsty came to drink. And tucked away, sometimes in small alleys, sometimes directly off a busy street, were the lupanaria, the brothels, whose purpose was as old as civilization itself. The word lupanar itself comes from lupa, the she-wolf, a Roman nickname for prostitutes, and in Pompeii, more than anywhere else, the walls still whisper their presence. If you close your eyes and picture the streets, you can almost hear sandals scuffing against stone. You can see the narrow paving slabs, polished by countless steps, and the stepping stones set across the road so that people could cross without soiling their feet in the runoff of water and waste. Among these streets, our slow walk leads us toward one of the most famous buildings ever uncovered in the ruins, the large brothel, the Lupanar of Pompeii. It does not look like much from the outside. A two-story building, its walls of rough stone, with an entrance that might once have been marked by a simple wooden door. Yet step inside, and you enter another world. The building was divided into small rooms, narrow cells with low stone beds built against the walls. These beds would once have been topped with mattresses of straw or cloth, long rotted away. In the center was a corridor, and above the doorways, painted images, erotic frescoes, offering a silent advertisement of the services within. These frescoes, still visible today, were more than decoration. They were, in a sense, a catalogue, a pictorial guide for customers who might not speak Latin, for Pompeii was a city of travelers. Sailors from across the Mediterranean stopped here, bringing languages from Greece, Egypt, Gaul, and beyond. The paintings offered clarity where words could not, and so the brothel became not only a place of exchange between bodies, but also between cultures. The women who worked here, we must pause to remember, were not wealthy courtesans of poetry and elegance. They were not figures of romance. Most were slaves, owned and controlled. Their labor no different in the eyes of Roman law than that of a cook or a farmhand, except that theirs was more secretive, more stigmatized. They came from distant provinces, sometimes taken in war, sometimes sold into servitude, their names often forgotten. A few carved their presence into the walls with graffiti, fragments of pride, humor, or defiance that still survive. In one cell, a name is scratched, Myrtis was here. In another, a boast, I screwed well. On yet another wall, a plea, take care of your health, my friend. These voices echo faintly through centuries, remind us that even in such places, people left their mark. The brothel was not hidden from view. In fact, Pompeii had more than one, scattered through its districts, sometimes near taverns, sometimes beside baths, sometimes just along a busy street. Sexual commerce was not secret in Roman life, though it was often spoken of with mockery or shame. Roman writers joked about prostitutes and brothels, yet the very existence of these places shows how common they were. If you imagine walking into one of these establishments at night, the oil lamps would flicker, casting shadows on the painted walls. The air would be heavy with smells: sweat, cheap wine, the smoke of lamps, and perhaps perfume to disguise it all. Customers might speak loudly, laugh, or quarrel over prices. For a coin or two, a man could choose a room, guided by the paintings or the words of the women themselves. And the city went on around them, indifferent, for in Pompeii, as in Rome, pleasure was considered a business like any other. Yet there was always a tension. Roman moralists condemned excess, and prostitution was both accepted and despised. Brothels paid taxes, and their keepers were known to the authorities. Yet those who entered might be mocked, and those who worked there rarely escaped their condition. It was a world both visible and shadowed, a place where society's contradictions played out night after night. But to tell this story fully, we must not only walk through the brothel itself, we must also drift outward into the city, into the daily lives that surrounded it. Because the lupanar was not an isolated place. It was part of the rhythm of Pompeii, a city with taverns, bakeries, workshops, and temples all crowded together. A man might drink cheap wine at a copona, stumble into a brothel, and then, the next morning, visit the baths to wash away the night before. Life moved in circles, with vice and virtue interwoven. The streets tell us much about this. Graffiti survives everywhere in Pompeii, scratched into walls by idle hands. Some boast of lovers, some advertise gladiators, some even mock politicians. And among them are crude jokes about brothels, women, and desire. One wall near the Forum reads, "Gaius loves Helvia." Another declares, "Restitutus slept here with many girls." Such casual inscriptions show how deeply the culture of sex was woven into ordinary talk, even if often in jest. And yet, as we move slowly through this history, we remember that beneath the laughter and the commerce were human lives. Women whose stories were rarely written down, whose labor sustained the very walls we now study. The brothel frescoes, so often reproduced in books, were not mere art, but tools of a trade. The women themselves were commodities, and the customers rarely thought otherwise. Still, there is a strange intimacy in what remains. To see the carved names, the crude jokes, the painted figures, is to glimpse not grand history, but everyday humanity, caught in a moment before it was buried forever beneath the ash of Vesuvius. That is perhaps why Pompeii fascinates us so deeply, not because it shows us emperors or great battles, but because it freezes the smallest details of life, even the forbidden corners. The streets of Pompeii, if you walk them slowly in your mind, have a peculiar stillness now. Yet if you close your eyes, you may sense the echoes of another age, when sandals slapped against stones, when voices rose and fell, when doors opened to laughter, song, and sometimes quarrel. In this long wandering, we step not into the grand villas of Pompeii, nor its theaters, nor its temples, but into the quieter corners that once drew countless men, where desire mingled with commerce, and where walls themselves still whisper the secrets of forbidden rooms. The brothels of Pompeii, known in Latin as lupanaria, were not grand palaces of vice. They were modest, even crude. To enter one was not to step into luxury, but into shadows, into narrow cells, into the smell of oil lamps and worn stone. And yet, their survival beneath the volcanic ash gives us today one of the clearest glimpses of Roman sexuality, stripped of poetry and performance, preserved in fresco and graffiti. Let us first imagine the Great Lupanar, the largest and most famous, located near the Stabian Baths. From the outside, it appears as any simple building, 2 stories tall, its walls built of rough stone. But passing through its threshold, we enter a corridor that leads to a series of tiny rooms, each with a stone bed fixed to the wall. Above these doorways are painted images, frescoes of men and women in acts of intimacy. They are not works of high art. They are not masterpieces to rival the mosaics of noble villas. They are simple, almost schematic, functional images meant to advertise what could be purchased within. The purpose of these frescoes is debated. Some say they served as a catalogue, especially for foreigners who spoke no Latin. for Pompeii was a crossroads of traders and sailors. Others believed they were simply decoration, reminders of the house's function. Whatever the reason, they remain today among the most striking relics of Pompeii's everyday world. Each small cell of the brothel is bare. The stone bed, now empty, would once have been covered with straw or cloth. The doorways were narrow, the spaces dark. A single lamp would have lit the room, casting wavering shadows on painted plaster. Imagine lying there, listening to the shuffle of sandals in the corridor outside, the laughter of drunken men, the mutter of negotiations, the creak of doors, the air heavy with the mingled scents of wine, sweat, and oil. The women who worked here were not free courtesans, skilled in music or poetry. They were not the high-class companions of Roman elites. Most were enslaved. Many were foreigners brought from Greece, Syria, Gaul, or beyond. Some were orphans or debtors sold into prostitution. Their lives were marked not by glamour but by labor, one client after another, day after day. And yet, in the margins of this bleak commerce, fragments of their humanity remain. Scratched into the walls, one finds graffiti, crude jokes, proud boasts, simple names. One hand wrote, "Martyr's Delights." Another carved, "Felix was here with many girls." A third simply marked a name, Eutychus. These fragments are all we have of their voices, and though they are faint, they remind us that real people lived, breathed, and endured in these very rooms. It is tempting to view the lupanar as hidden, secret, but in truth it was part of the ordinary fabric of Pompeii. It stood near baths, taverns and shops woven into daily life. A man might visit a bath, stop at a wine shop, and enter the brothel without much ceremony. Prostitution was legal, taxed, and regulated. Brothel keepers, known as lanones, were often freedmen, men of low status but entrepreneurial spirit, who kept records and paid dues to the authorities. The transactions inside were part of the city's economy, not unlike bread baked in ovens or wine poured into cups. Still, prostitution carried stigma. Respectable Roman matrons would never enter these streets, and men who frequented brothels might face ridicule if their habits became too well known. The Roman elite often mocked prostitutes in their literature, joking about their names, their prices, their customers. And yet, behind the ridicule was dependency. The trade endured precisely because it was in demand, because it met needs that society at once indulged and disdained. If we step back into the corridor of the lupanar and pause, we may hear in imagination the voices of clients. A sailor from Gaul, speaking broken Latin, clutching his coin. A local youth nervous, glancing at the paintings before choosing a room. An older merchant, drunk, laughing loudly as he pays. The women respond, sometimes in silence, sometimes with practiced words, guiding each man to his cell. Time passes, footsteps come and go, doors open and shut. Outside, the city goes on. Bakers kneading bread, smiths hammering iron, children chasing each other in alleys. Inside, in these narrow rooms, another kind of work is done, one rarely written in the annals of history. The lupanar was not unique. Pompeii had many places of sexual commerce. Some were simple rooms attached to taverns. Others were private houses that doubled as brothels. In some cases, prostitutes worked in the upper rooms of inns, while customers drank below. The city was alive with such exchanges, hidden in plain sight, part of the rhythm of daily life. The graffiti outside brothels is telling. One wall reads, "If anyone is looking for me, I am in the brothel." Another says, "Restitutus has been here many times." The casualness of such inscriptions suggests how normal it was to speak openly, even crudely, about these visits. For Pompeians, it was not a matter of secrecy but of jest, of camaraderie. And yet, despite its ordinariness, the brothel was a place of contradictions. It was a business, yet also a site of shame. It was tolerated, yet scorned. It was filled with laughter, but also with suffering. The women inside could never leave freely, and their stories rarely reached beyond the walls. In the grand villas of Pompeii, frescoes showed myths of gods and heroes. In the lupanar, frescoes showed acts of sex, direct, unadorned, stripped of myth. These two worlds existed side by side, one celebrated, the other hidden, yet both equally real. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE froze this world in an instant. Ash fell upon the roofs, walls collapsed, bodies were buried. In the brothel, archaeologists found the remains of people who had sought shelter. The frescoes darkened but endured. The graffiti remained carved in stone. And when the city was uncovered many centuries later, the lupanar was among the most startling discoveries, a glimpse into the private, forbidden life of Rome. Even today, to walk those rooms is unsettling. The narrowness, the darkness, the intimacy of the images, it feels less like a ruin than a memory. You can almost sense the weight of footsteps, the murmur of voices, the presence of those who once worked and waited within. And in that quiet, you realize that history is not only about emperors and generals, but about the countless, forgotten lives of ordinary people, whose labor filled the corners of cities, whose traces remain in faded paint and scratched words. When we think of Pompeii today, we imagine the silent ruins, the empty streets lined with stones, the broken columns and faded wall paintings, and the still presence of Mount Vesuvius looming in the distance. Yet once, this city was far from silent. It was alive with voices, footsteps, and the hum of daily life. And within this city, hidden in plain sight, stood places that remind us of Rome's most private customs, the brothels, where commerce and intimacy intertwined. Let us begin slowly, as if we are walking through the streets on a warm summer evening in the year 78 CE, just a year before the Great Eruption. The sun lingers low, casting golden light across tiled roofs. The stones beneath our sandals are warm from the heat of the day, and the shadows of people stretch long across the road. Bakers are selling their last loaves of bread, tavern owners are pouring cups of rough wine, and children are still darting between fountains, their laughter mingling with the murmur of conversations. But if we turn down a quieter lane, past the chatter of the marketplace, we find a building that is ordinary in its exterior yet remarkable in its purpose, the great lupanar, the brothel of Pompeii. The word itself, lupanar, comes from lupa, she-wolf, a Roman term for prostitute, and in this place the word lives in stone. The building is not large or grand. Its walls are made of plain masonry, and its entrance would not have drawn much attention. Yet once inside, we find ourselves in a narrow corridor lined with small rooms. Each chamber has a low bed of stone, rough and unadorned. At first glance, they might seem like cells in a prison, and in a way, for the women who worked here, they were. Above the doors of these small rooms are frescoes, painted scenes of men and women in various acts of intimacy. They are not elegant mythological paintings like those in wealthy villas. They are simple, direct, and functional. Each image advertises what could be purchased inside, like a visual catalogue. For sailors or travelers who could not speak Latin, these paintings offered clarity where words failed. It is a silent kind of language, transactional and practical. Step into one of these rooms in your mind. The walls are close, the bed hard, the air heavy. A small clay lamp flickers on the ledge, casting uncertain light across plaster walls. You hear footsteps in the corridor, the voices of men bargaining, the occasional laugh or cough. The smell is a mixture of oil, sweat, and the faint sharpness of cheap wine carried in from the taverns. For a coin or two, a man buys not romance but an hour of escape. The women here were not free. Most were enslaved, owned by the brothel keeper. Their labor no different from that of a cook or a stable hand, except that it dealt in intimacy. They came from across the empire, Greece, Syria, Gaul, Spain, brought as spoils of war or sold through the trade of human lives. Their names are sometimes remembered only through graffiti: Myrtus, Eutychus, Victoria. One scratched onto a wall reads, "Myrtus delights." Another reads, "I screwed well." These fragments of words, preserved by ash, are all that remain of voices otherwise silenced. The brothel keeper himself was likely a freedman, a man once enslaved who had bought or earned his freedom. His business was tolerated by the city, for prostitution was legal and even taxed in Rome. The authorities knew of such places and collected revenue from them, treating them as part of the city's economy. And so, in Pompeii, the lupanar stood not as an outlawed den, but as a regulated business, a place both acknowledged and despised. Yet Roman society was filled with contradictions. Men who visited brothels often joked about them in graffiti, scribbling crude remarks on the walls outside. One inscription reads, "Restitutus has often been here." Another says, "If anyone is looking for me, I am at the brothel." To write such things was to both boast and mock, to turn private acts into public humor. At the same time, respectable citizens condemned prostitution, speaking of it as a stain on morality, even while many of them quietly partook. It was a world of acceptance and hypocrisy woven together in the same breath. If you pause to imagine a single night here, the picture becomes clearer. Sailors, their pockets jingling with coin after a voyage, stumble in, laughing loudly. A young local man, nervous, peers at the paintings, deciding which room to enter. An older merchant, drunk, slaps a coin on the counter and demands his place. The women receive them with practiced words, guiding them to their beds, each transaction swift, each encounter passing. Outside, the city continues as always, its markets closing, its fountains still flowing, its amphitheater echoing with voices from a distant performance. Life in Pompeii had many layers, and the lupanar was only one thread in its fabric. To understand the presence of these brothels, one must also understand Roman ideas of sexuality. In Rome, sex was not viewed through the same moral lens as in later societies. It was not so much the act itself that carried judgment, but one's role within it. A freeborn Roman man might visit prostitutes, both male and female, without fear of legal punishment, so long as he paid, and so long as the partner was of lower social standing. What mattered was not chastity but hierarchy. To pay a prostitute was acceptable. To behave as one, however, was shameful. The women of Pompeii's lupanar, being slaves, were considered outside the moral order. Their service was tolerated precisely because their status made them voiceless. This reality, stark as it seems, was softened only by the humor of graffiti and the bright colors of frescoes. On some walls, men carved messages about their experiences as if leaving reviews. On others, names of women appear, some praised, some mocked. In this way, the walls themselves became witnesses to thousands of fleeting encounters, silent guardians of memories that otherwise would have vanished. Archaeologists, upon discovering these brothels, were at first scandalized. In the 19th century, when excavations brought these frescoes to light, many were locked away in the so-called secret cabinet of the Naples Museum, hidden from public view as indecent. Yet today they are studied with curiosity, not because they are shocking, but because they show us everyday Roman life in its rawest form, unpolished, unsanitized. The eruption of 79 CE froze all this in time. Ash fell on the roof, collapsing it. People ran in fear, some perhaps seeking shelter within, though no safety could be found. The women of the lupanar, like the bakers, the smiths, the merchants, faced the same fate: sudden burial, silence, and centuries of sleep beneath the hardened ash. When the city was rediscovered, the lupanar reemerged as if its doors had been closed only yesterday, its graffiti still sharp, its frescoes still bright. And so, when we wander slowly through its narrow rooms today, we walk not only among ruins but among the remnants of lives half forgotten. Each stone bed, each painted scene, each carved word tells us that even in the margins of society, people lived, worked, and endured. History, in Pompeii, is not only about emperors and generals, but about sailors, prostitutes, innkeepers, and children, their ordinary lives captured in extraordinary preservation. In the heart of Pompeii, among the narrow stone streets that wound between bakeries, taverns, and bustling workshops, there was another world, quieter by day, but unmistakably alive when night fell. This was the hidden world of the lupanar, the brothels of Pompeii. To walk past one in the bright light of morning was to see only another stone doorway, another weathered wall with faint paintings clinging stubbornly to plaster. To walk past at night was to sense something different, the flicker of torchlight through a thin curtain, the muffled laughter of men, the quick hush of women's voices, and the faint perfume of oil and wine carried on the air. Pompeii, like many Roman towns, carried its pleasures in plain sight, but the brothel held a unique place. It was neither fully hidden nor entirely celebrated. Rather, it was woven into the daily fabric of the city, an accepted necessity, a tolerated shadow. The brothel keeper paid his taxes, just as the baker or tavern owner did. The women were considered part of the trade, as much as the bread from the oven or the wine from the vine. And yet, for all its commonness, there lingered an aura of secrecy about these houses, for here was a trade that lived not in sunlight, but in lamplight. The building itself was modest. The most famous lupanar of Pompeii still stands today, preserved beneath the ash of Vesuvius, its walls bearing the same images that once greeted customers 2,000 years ago. Inside were small stone cubicles, hardly larger than a modern pantry, each furnished with a low bed of masonry, once covered with a mattress of straw. Above the doorways were painted frescoes, simple but clear in their meaning. They served as both decoration and advertisement, showing the kinds of services one might find within. A man entering did not need to ask in clumsy words. He could simply point to the painting above the door. The smell inside such a place would have been its own mixture: smoke from torches, the sour tang of spilled wine, the sharpness of olive oil used to soothe the skin, the musk of many bodies pressed into tight spaces. The sound was a low murmur, punctuated by laughter, a cough, a coin sliding across a wooden table, the scrape of sandals on stone. It was not luxurious, not gilded like the villas of the wealthy. It was plain, functional, and meant only for business. Yet in its walls, thousands of stories unfolded each night. The men who came here were many. Sailors, their hands rough from rope and salt, carrying the restless hunger of long weeks at sea. Merchants, eager to spend a portion of their profit before moving on to the next town. Gladiators, flushed with victory or drowning their defeats in wine and fleeting comfort. Farmers, laborers, even wealthy citizens who scolded the decline of morals in public, but slipped quietly through these doors in private. All came to leave something behind: loneliness, exhaustion, or simple desire. All carried with them the small bronze coins that bought an hour of escape. And the women, what of them? They were the silent heart of the lupanar, though their voices are faint across time. Some were slaves, sold into this trade, their bodies a profit for the master who owned them. Others had been free once, widows or poor women who found no other way to survive. They were Greek, Syrian, Egyptian, Gaulish, and Italian, drawn from the corners of the empire, gathered here into these rooms. Their names survive in fragments, scrawled in graffiti: Myrtis, Eutychus, Fabia, and many others. On the walls of Pompeii's brothels, men left their marks. Graffiti covers the plaster, etched by a nail or piece of charcoal. Some are simple boasts. Felix had a fine time here with Helvia. Others are crude jokes, or brief notes of affection. Myrtis loves. These scratches on stone speak more honestly than any official record. They show the raw voices of ordinary people, unpolished, unashamed, capturing the mixture of humor, lust, and sometimes tenderness that lived within these walls. Step into one of those small rooms in your mind. The torchlight flickers against faded paint. The stone bed is hard beneath a thin mattress. A jug of wine rests in the corner, half empty. The curtain sways as someone passes outside. Within, two people share a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes lingering, sometimes filled with laughter, sometimes only silence. A transaction, yes, but also a human connection, however fleeting, etched into memory. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. The bakers' ovens glowed, the taverns poured wine, the amphitheater stood ready for games. Respectable matrons walked the streets by day, averting their gaze from the lupanar as if to deny its presence, yet knowing it was there, just as everyone did. For Pompeii was a city alive with contradiction, public virtue, private vice, and the acceptance that both could exist side by side. When dawn came, the brothel grew quiet. The lamps were snuffed out, the curtains drawn aside. The women rested, the coins counted. The graffiti waited for another hand to scratch another name. By morning, it looked almost abandoned, its secrets hidden once more behind plain stone walls. But the night had written itself into those walls, into the memory of each visitor, into the faint laughter and sighs that seemed to cling to the air even after silence fell. And so the brothel was not merely a house of transaction. It was a mirror of Pompeii itself, a city vibrant and flawed, ordinary and extraordinary, where life was lived fully in the shadow of Vesuvius, not knowing how short that life might be. The streets of Pompeii, even as the day fades, hold a peculiar energy. The air is thick with dust from cart wheels and the scent of olives being pressed in nearby shops. The city is alive with the quiet chatter of citizens returning from the market, their baskets heavy with bread, figs, and the salted fish for which the town is known. The stones of the narrow streets glow faintly in the last light of the sun, their surface worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. As shadows stretch longer, some residents retreat to the safety of their homes, while others seek different kinds of company. Just beyond the bustling forum, tucked into one of the smaller side streets, stands a building that seems ordinary at first glance, but which has earned a reputation whispered in taverns and at dinner tables. It is the lupanar, the brothel of Pompeii. By daylight, its walls appear like any other, modest, pale, and unassuming. But as the lamps are lit within, and the faint laughter of women drifts into the night air, the building seems to transform. Men of all ranks slip toward it. Traders smelling of spices, farmers with roughened hands, freedmen eager to spend their hard-earned coins, and even the occasional nobleman in disguise, careful not to be seen. Inside, the air is heavy with oil lamps, the smoke curling faintly upward, staining the plastered ceilings a darker hue. The flicker of light reveals painted frescoes, still bright despite the years, scenes of men and women entwined in embraces, gestures bold and unashamed. These paintings are not only decoration, but advertisement, a silent guide for the customers to know what is offered in each small room. The rooms themselves are narrow, their beds built from stone, softened only by thin mattresses and simple blankets. Privacy is scarce, for the walls are thin and sounds pass easily from one chamber to the next. Yet within this place, men do not come seeking silence. They come for distraction, for release, for company. The women, gathered here from many corners of the empire, speak in different tongues, though necessity has taught them enough of the local dialect to serve their trade. Some are from Greece, their eyes holding memories of islands far away. Others are from the east, brought here by merchants whose ships carried not only goods, but also human lives. A few are local, born within the shadow of Vesuvius, sold into this work by families too poor to survive otherwise. Each has her own story, though few tell it aloud. They learn quickly that to survive here, one must wear a mask of charm and allure, hiding fear and exhaustion behind smiles that must never fade. Coins pass from hand to hand, and for a brief while they play roles, mistresses, companions, lovers, until the door closes again, and they are left with the silence of stone beds and cold air. The keeper of the lupanar, a man whose name slips through the records of history, moves among the rooms like a shadow. His eyes are always sharp, counting coins, watching for trouble. To him, the women are not companions but investments. He ensures they are fed just enough to work, clothed just enough to be presentable, and watched just enough to prevent escape. Yet even he cannot control every whisper, every glance exchanged in secret. The lupanar is not merely a house of flesh. It is a place where Pompeii reveals its hidden self. Here, senators mingle with sailors, their social ranks dissolving in the dim light. In the streets outside, a noble might pass a slave without a glance, but here, within these narrow walls, all are simply men seeking the same thing. For a coin, the barriers of class dissolve. Graffiti on the walls tells the stories the frescoes do not. Scratched by customers with styluses and bits of charcoal, the writings boast of pleasures had, of women named, of nights remembered too vividly, or perhaps imagined. Some lines are crude, others playful, but together they form a chorus of voices that still echoes centuries later. I was here, they proclaim, and I found joy. The names of women appear again and again. Fabia, Cytheris, Merope, etched into stone as if to make them immortal, even as the women themselves fade into history. Outside the lupanar, life in Pompeii continues with its own rhythms. Bakers stoke their ovens through the night, filling the air with the scent of bread. Tavern keepers pour watered wine for laborers too poor to afford better. Children, long asleep, dream in houses where their parents whisper of debts, of crops, of tomorrow's concerns. But inside the brothel, time seems suspended, the outside world dim and distant. It is not always laughter that fills the rooms. There are tears, quiet and hidden, when a door is closed and the lamplight dims. There are moments of tenderness, unexpected and fleeting, when a man treats a woman with gentleness rather than hunger. And there are moments of cruelty, too. For not every customer is kind. The walls of the lupanar have seen all these things, and though they do not speak, they hold the weight of countless nights. As the night deepens, the rhythm of the brothel slows. The first rush of customers fades, leaving behind the lingering scent of oil and sweat. The women rest against the stone beds, their eyes heavy, their bodies weary. Some count the coins they have earned, though most of those coins will never be theirs. Others stare at the frescoes above, the painted scenes a cruel reminder of the life they are forced to live. Beyond the walls, the streets grow quieter. A drunk stumbles past, singing off key, his voice echoing against the stones. A dog barks in the distance. The mountain looms overhead, silent, its shadow stretching across the sleeping city. No one within Pompeii knows what fate awaits them in the years to come, how ash and fire will one day bury their lives in an instant. For now, there is only tonight, only the dim glow of lamps, only the soft murmur of voices in the lupanar. The brothel stands as it has for years, a place forbidden yet openly known, a place where desire and despair are bound together, and as the final lamp is extinguished and darkness claims the rooms, the lupanar settles into silence, waiting for the next day, when once again its doors will open and the cycle will begin anew. The sun rises quietly over Pompeii, the first light sliding down the mountain slopes and spilling across tiled rooftops. The city awakens not with noise but with movement, the shuffling of sandals, the low creak of shutters, the muted call of a vendor arranging his figs in baskets. The air smells faintly of ash and salt, the ever-present reminder that the sea and the volcano watch over this place together. Down one narrow street, where the cobblestones still hold the coolness of the night, the lupanar begins to stir. The wooden door, marked with discreet carvings, opens just enough to let in a wisp of fresh air. Inside, the women stretch quietly, each moving with the practiced rhythm of another day beginning in the same small space. Lamps that burned through the night are snuffed out, leaving trails of smoke curling toward the ceiling. The rooms are tiny, barely wide enough to hold a stone bed and a stool. The walls are painted in faded reds and ochres, still bright where the sunlight reaches through cracks. Each painting tells a story, and though the faces are worn with time, the gestures are unmistakable, scenes of pleasure, painted not as art, but as invitation. The frescoes are the only things that never sleep here. Gaia, the oldest of the women, moves first. Her joints protest softly, but she has learned not to listen. She fills a small bowl with water, washing her face with the kind of care she once reserved for ceremony. Her hands are rough from years of oil and labor, but her motions are graceful still. Around her, the younger ones wake slowly, some stretching, some staring at the ceiling with the blank gaze of dreamers who do not wish to return to the world. The keeper arrives before the market bell. His sandals slap against the stone floor, announcing him long before he speaks. He is not cruel, only practical. Coins must flow, the rooms must never stay empty. He checks each corner, each lamp, each bed. His words are few but firm, and when he leaves, the quiet breathes back into the air. Outside, the morning grows louder. A donkey cart clatters past. Two boys argue in Latin over the price of bread. The lupanar exists beside it all, hidden yet known. The townspeople pass it without looking, but everyone knows what lies behind its door. Pompeii, for all its beauty, has never been shy about such things. By mid-morning, the first visitors arrive. They come from the market, the baths, the taverns. Some wear clean tunics. Some smell of smoke and sweat. They speak in low tones, laugh too loudly, pretend they are not the same men who bowed solemnly in temples hours earlier. Each carries his own story, a day's profit to spend, a night's loneliness to forget. Lucilla, the silent painter, slips through the back entrance with a basket of plaster and pigment. She is not one of the women, though her presence is tolerated. She restores the walls when the colors fade, mixing her paints in the dim light. Her fingers trace the outlines of figures long since cracked, her brush coaxing back the illusion of desire. She never speaks to the men, and they rarely notice her. To them, she is a shadow; to the women, a small mercy, for she brings with her the faint smell of clean plaster and lemon oil that masks the heavier air of the rooms. When the heat of midday settles over Pompeii, the lupanar becomes still again. The thick walls trap the warmth, turning the rooms into small, private furnaces. The women fan themselves with bits of linen, the sound soft and rhythmic. Outside, cicadas drone lazily, filling the spaces between silence. From time to time, a breeze slips in through the open doorway, carrying the smell of baking bread and distant salt. Sabina, the child of the brothel, sits near the entrance polishing the brass hinges with a scrap of cloth. Her small hands move quickly, practiced. She hums a song her mother once sang, though she can no longer remember the words. The men step over her without noticing, but she notices all of them. She counts their sandals, their rings, their moods. She has learned the language of footsteps, the confident stride of a nobleman, the hurried shuffle of a guilty one, the heavy stomp of a soldier already drunk. She dreams, sometimes, of leaving the city entirely, of following the road east until it disappears into the hills. But for now she polishes, and hums and listens. Afternoon brings new visitors. A merchant named Marcus Varro, silver-haired and tired, arrives as he does each week. He pays for an hour but asks for nothing more than conversation. He sits on the edge of a bed while one of the women, Doris, pours watered wine into 2 small cups. They speak of the weather, of ships, of his late wife whose voice, he says, sounded like the sea at night. The woman nods gently, her expression calm. She has learned that the men who pay for silence are often the loneliest of all. In another room, a gladiator rests before his next match. His body bears the marks of combat, yet his hands tremble slightly as he drinks. He believes in superstition more than strength. He comes here for luck, for ritual. He touches the fresco on the wall before leaving, murmuring something under his breath. The women watch him go, uncertain whether to pity or admire him. As the sun dips low, the city changes again. Shadows stretch across the narrow streets, and laughter grows louder. The taverns fill, the wine flows, and the line between decency and indulgence begins to blur. The brothel's lamps are lit one by one, small flames trembling behind the colored glass. The flicker paints the walls in motion, making the figures in the frescoes seem almost alive. Helena, The tavern keeper next door leans against her doorway. She listens to the muffled sounds through the shared wall, the laughter, the whispers, the sighs. She pours wine for her customers and pretends not to hear. Yet each night she finds herself pausing, wondering what stories unfold beyond the wall, what lives begin and end in those narrow rooms. She once dreamed of leaving Pompeii too, but now she owns her tavern, her few coins, her solitude. Dreams like paint fade over time, night deepens. The streets empty of children, filled instead with the voices of those who prefer the dark. The lupanar glows like a lantern in the distance, its door never fully closed. Inside, the rhythm continues. Doors open and close, footsteps echo on the stone. There is laughter, forced and genuine, mingling in the smoky air. Oil lamps sputter as moths dance too close to their flames. In a small corner room, Petronia hides. She is not one of the brothel's women, though she pretends to be. She fled from her master days ago and found refuge here, where few look too closely at new faces. Each time the door opens, her breath catches. She fears the moment when someone might recognize her. But for now, she is safe, wrapped in shadows and the soft murmur of other lives. The keeper counts his coins by lamplight, lips moving silently. Outside, a guard passes by, his armor clinking faintly, but he does not stop. The two men understand each other. So long as the brothel stays quiet, no questions are asked. The city sleeps best when it pretends not to know. As midnight approaches, the air grows heavy, the lamps burn low, and the laughter fades into murmurs. A woman sings softly in a language long forgotten, her voice barely more than a breath. The sound drifts through the hallways, gentle and haunting. Even the mountain seems to listen, its dark outline steady against the stars. In these hours, the lupanar belongs only to itself. The world outside ceases to matter, the temples, the markets, the politics of men. Here there is only the pulse of breathing, the creak of the beds, the whisper of fabric. Life condensed into sound and shadow, and above it all, the frescoes watch silently, their painted eyes eternal.